Hi, this is Daryl Reeves with Imagine Nonprofit Consulting. I wanted to talk to you about what does it mean to be a nonprofit? What does a nonprofit mean? So, in businesses and in life, you need to make money. So, to be a no profit isn't really realistic. Businesses have to make a profit. People should think that, or most people think that nonprofits should not make a profit. That's just not sustainable. A profit bringing in more revenue than expenses year over year. So think about it. If a business makes no profit, it will fail. So your business has employees, it has inflation, rising costs, raises to pay for, rent to pay for, equipment to invest in, and computers to buy, programs to pay for, create new programs. How can you do that if there's no profit? It's just not logical. So nonprofit leaders really have to grasp this. I've been dealing with many nonprofits who feel as though a nonprofit, their budgeting process should just be to break even. I have yet to see ever a nonprofit business or leader strive or make it part of policy to create a budget that is profitable, meaning we are going to purposely shoot for a budget that is at least 10% more than our expenses, just at least to cover inflation. And that barely covers any room for error. So, like if you have a program within your nonprofit that comes up short and then you have to deal with it during the year and then you have to lay off people. Well, if you're not setting yourself up for success at the beginning, it's just not going to happen. I'm sorry, but I feel like most nonprofit leaders, I'm sorry, guys, but you might be a little bit lazy, not putting at least the policy in there or even shooting for it. You're just starting out to fail. You have to make a profit to survive. You have to cover inflations. You have to increase your reserves to pay for program expansion. You need to invest. It's imperative to treat the nonprofit as a business that needs to make a profit. Don't spend more than you bring in. Now, one would say that you should bring in at least 10 to 15% profit each year, with 20 to 25 being even better. But I've yet to ever see a nonprofit ever. I can't even think of one unless I brought it up. And then they go through the exercise and they try and they just come up short and then they end up breaking even. I feel like those leaders never really took it seriously. They didn't dig into the operations to see how they can cut unless I really push. And when I say cut, I'm just talking about doing things that are logical, not saying, "Oh, we're just going to, lay off these people." Um, every organization, especially in the years where things are very rich, you're bringing in lots of money. Nonprofits tend to get a little bit loose with the credit cards. They get a little bit loose with the budget. They're not really looking at their expenses. They're not really pushing the revenue. It's just coming in. Things are kind of on autopilot. And then when a recession hits, then everybody gets smart. Then they start to look at their expenses. That's not the time to do it. You should be smart with your budget when the years are doing very well, not just the lean years. To clarify, a nonprofit means that it doesn't have shareholders. It still needs a profit. Just because you're not paying shareholders or you're not cutting a profit to some owner, it still needs to make a profit. The proceeds are used in the business and profits are not distributed to shareholders in the way of dividends or shareholder earnings. But the excess revenue isn't treated as a profit as a corporation. So keep the excess profits are kept in an account or at the bottom of the balance sheet as net assets, and so as a profit. But what happens is you treat it like a savings account. Then you can use it for those years where you're off a little bit. But you shouldn't use those reserves in future years just to balance your budget. That's really dangerous because you're still operating at that rate for which you got yourself into a negative, in a deficit position. And then you enter the next year and everything's just fine. We just took money from reserves. Well, that snowballs. And then the next year you have to pretty much double up and try to make up for that. Plus make up for the next year. Plus, you're taking out the reserves. It's just dangerous. You can't shrink yourself. You can't shrink your way to success. In my opinion, if you don't go into a nonprofit budget year without the intention of growing, you're going to shrink. You're not going to be successful. You can't cut your way to success. When companies don't go into their budget year with the intention of growing, they are going to fail. That's just it. You can't continue to run a business without having the mindset that you're going to grow the business, you're going to increase reserves. You have to budget at least a 10% profit year over year. So if inflation's 5, 6, 7% year over year, as it has been over the last few years, a break even budget is already behind that amount. So if you have a budget of say $10 million and you break even, have a 10 million in expenses, well, over the course of that next year, if you have 5% inflation, you're already short 500,000 that next year as you exit that next year. So you're already short. Then you have to go into that next year with the intention of another 5%. So you're short $1 million. You're setting yourself in the business up for failure by being short $1 million by not having a budget that is at least a 10% profit. I know this might be a little bit confusing, but I hope that's helping you understand. A lazy CEO tries to break even in the name of it's a nonprofit. We just need to break even. They don't want to face the hard reality that's necessary. I'm sorry, but I've seen this happen so many times. I have to trust my instinct here. Um, I feel like I'm going up against leaders and I have to be respectful. I have to know my place as a chief financial officer. I try my best to try to make that clear that you have to have a budget that is at least a 10% profit or more. Um, Most CEOs listen, they stare at me like a deer in headlights saying, how are we going to do that? I'm sorry, but they have to do it. We have to get leaders in the nonprofit to collaborate with the staff, and you have to figure it out. If you continue to just let them break even, it's easy. That's it. I mean, everybody wants to eat candy all the time. I'm sorry. They don't want to dig into the operations, but they want to shell out annual budget templates where program directors do the work for them. And they just tell them to shave off a percentage point or two. And they're not really realistic. They just do it as an exercise. CEOs must be involved with the operations. They can't just leave it to all the VPs and program directors. Money makes people look smart. So when the economy is good, budgeting is really easy. Money gets spent easily. CEOs just sit back and watch the numbers go up. But when a recession occurs, and it will, that's when things get weird. All of a sudden, people are getting smart. Like, why are you traveling? Why are you doing this? Why are you spending money on that? Why are we having this expense that's not necessary? Like, when the money's there and there's no recession and the economy's booming, people just spend money. Well, then you perhaps should be budgeting for at least a 10% profit, even in those years that are up. So when you do have those down years, you can spend money on things that are necessary. However, lazy management does get exposed when recessions occur. It's going to happen. I mean, I hate to tell you how old I am, but I'm over 50. And in those 34 years of working, 36 years or whatever, I've been through 4 recessions. I've seen it happen. Um, Young leaders, you might want to think about that. You're going to go through a recession eventually. I don't think it's realistic or logical to think that it will never happen. Come on. Management and boards start to dig into the business and claim, we didn't know things were so bad. Well, it's not that. You're not budgeting for a profit. Sometimes nonprofits struggle with that because if they budget for a profit, then they're rich and people may not want to donate. I get that. However, you have to figure out the marketing and collaboration, and you have to think about the messaging of that, how you demonstrate that. It's important to keep your eye on the bottom line at all times, especially when money is plentiful. Be smart when times are good, build your reserves, and prepare for recessions. It's just a waste of time to shut your eyes, spend money, don't budget for a profit, and then when the recession hits, you're spending like 6 months figuring out who you should lay off and the messaging of that, and it's just really bad business. Always have a contingency plan or operating procedure when a recession hits. Time wasted on panic budget cuts spirals the business down, and the company loses focus on the work that needs to be done and the marketing and developing efforts that need to happen. Business makes Businesses make lazy decisions by cutting marketing and development to balance budget deficits when a recession hits, when in fact marketing and development efforts may need to increase in order to grow the business when a recession does occur. Again, you cannot shrink yourself to success. What are reserves used for? Try not to use profits or reserves for general operational budget shortfalls. To have a general operations budget, at least break even, unless utilizing the reserves for an investment in new program. But regular operations utilizing reserves shrinks the operations and is risky if reserves are used for ongoing operations rather than avoiding making difficult decisions to stop the shortfalls. I've seen businesses or nonprofits, I've seen board of directors approve budgets, and they're not even that big. Say, well, not that big, but between 10, $15 million budget. They're short $1, $2, $3 million. I've seen board of directors approve utilizing reserves in the millions of dollars. Very, very dangerous. They can do that for maybe 1, 2, or 3 years, but that's an alarm. So when that happens, the board of directors needs to say, you get 1 year to fix this. Say you have $10 million in reserves and you get board approval to spend 2, 3, $4 million of those reserves to balance an operational budget. This isn't an investment. This is just lazy business of saying, we're just going to throw money at this and we're just going to continue to operate as we are and hope for the best. But there's no intentional desire, or there's no intentional or intentionality or desire to really dig into the business, and they just keep going. And so next year they're short not 3 million. Well, that just grew to 6. So out of that 10 million bucks, you're done. It's that drastic. And then after 2 years, you're laying off a third of the staff and everybody's crying. And if you have a union, God forbid, then you have to lay off people and you have a strike. It's just, it's just really bad. Investments can be in actual investments as working with an investment company to invest in stocks, money market savings accounts, commercial paper. Maybe some of your reserves, you need to be thinking better about how you can grow those reserves. If you're lucky enough to have millions of dollars in your bank accounts and reserves. Investments can also be investing in assets such as real estate to grow programs for which is the support of the mission of the organization that may or may not bring in a profit. Very risky, but if you have that kind of money laying around, you might have real estate in your portfolio just because you are a nonprofit that has buildings. You need to look at those real estate holdings and see whether or not all of it's necessary and how you can convert that into bringing in money. Yes, you're a nonprofit, but you can still bring in money on your real estate holdings. Not all programmatic activities may bring in a profit. Many times programs lose money, but in the development of the nonprofit, you may bring in general donations to support the entire organization and its mission. The reasons that nonprofits bring in excess revenue, profits are used for program and overhead. Reserves can be used for future capital expenditure. Think about the Uber model. So say you're a business and you purchase an Uber. Well, you don't expense that Uber in 1 year. You expense it over 5 years. You don't do it in 1 year. So it's going to make your profit and loss statement, short like 80 grand because you spent $100,000 on this Tesla, but you only brought in 20. Well, you actually spread the cost over 5 years, so you break even year over year. You might want to build your reserves. Invest in these returns for at least the expected inflationary rates. If you don't, the cash sitting in reserves won't even cover your inflation. Investment returns can be used for your operating budget, which may include program and/or overhead. Dangerous, I don't recommend it, but they can be used for that if you plan for it. So if you have reserves that are making money, maybe you can plan for some of those investments to be, or the returns to be used for program. I think that's smart. I think if you just have investments that aren't earning any money and it's just sitting there, it's actually losing value because of inflation. You can use reserves to pay for ongoing program when revenues are suffering in down years. That's kind of your emergency. And then actual emergencies. If something major happens to the nonprofit that insurance doesn't pay for, you have reserves to cover that, and you don't have to cut staff in order to pay that. That's very, very dangerous. Well, that's it for my presentation. I hope that was helpful.